On a night like any other, pinned somewhere along the dreary timeline of another cold, endless Pittsburgh winter, two men entered Montefiore Hospital and changed the trajectory of John Moon's life. It was 1971, the year of the Pentagon Papers and the Attica prison riot, the year Disney World opened and Jim Morrison died. John was 22, on his own, and working his second job since graduating high school. His first didn't last long. The J&L steel mill was a tough place, dangerous and exhausting, barely worth the effort. What good was money you were too tired to enjoy? Not that he could just up and quit. He had a wife, Betty, whom he'd met in high school. They married in 1969, and their first son, John Jr., was born later that year. Even with Betty working as a nurse's aide at Shadyside Hospital, money was tight. If John was going to quit, he'd need something else first. One day at work, he was talking about wanting to get out of the steel mill. His friends just nodding along when one of them made a suggestion. He knew of a job, he said. Good money, no 2 days the same, career field with 1,000 options. Sky's the limit. John asked what it was, and the guy pointed at him as if he'd laid his finger on the truth and said, hospital orderly. By 71, John had been listening to the sploosh of bedpans emptying for almost 3 years, feeling that somewhere along the way he'd taken a wrong turn, that there had to be something more. And then, as he stuffed a set of rumpled sheets into a hamper, that something more walked into his life. It was late when it happened. John was working in 2 East, one of Montefiore's oldest wings, now full of cancer patients, surgical cases, when from the far end of a quiet and otherwise deserted corridor, he heard garbled voices coming in over a two-way radio. He just stepped into a patient's room and couldn't see where the sound was coming from until he passed right by the door. 2 figures, large and moving slowly, draped head to toe in white like angels from a high school passion play. John thought they might be orderlies too, but why they'd be here on his floor with a radio he couldn't imagine. I'll be right back, he whispered to his patient before stepping outside to get a better look. He got only as far as the doorway when the stretcher came jamming into the room, John barely out of the way in time to keep from being run over by 2 men in white and the charge nurse right behind them. Nobody so much as glanced in his direction, as if he wasn't there at all. 1 minute John's taking care of a patient. The next minute, the patient is theirs. Mr. Smith, the first man said as he eased up alongside the bed. We're here to take you home. The patient looked up with the placid, animal eyes of a man with no control over the moment. Is it cold? Sure is, said the second man as he slid their stretcher alongside the bed. But we got a blanket here for you, so you're going to be just fine. 1, 2, go. And they lifted the patient, swiftly, with great care, onto their stretcher, then buckled the lap belt with a sharp click. John still had no idea who these guys were, except to say that they definitely weren't orderlies. Their uniforms were white, like his, but cut differently. More like button-up jackets with Nehru collars and sewn-on patches. Plus, there was the radio that one of them wore on his hip. John couldn't take his eyes off the radio. It was turned down to a whisper, but never silent, filling the air with a stream of encoded words he didn't understand, like distant voices reaching out from some other planet. Now with the patient loaded, they were leaving. Once again, they eased right by John and slipped out with a nod to the nurse. Here was a woman who only ever acknowledged John when she needed something, a patient needing to be moved, or those damn bedpans, but he couldn't help but notice that now, to these guys, she nodded back. The men moved back down the hall as if gliding, silent, except for the alien murmur of the two-way, then rounded a corner, and with that, they were gone. The whole encounter hadn't taken 30 seconds.